Hey everybody, Jane here, and I want to talk to you about the TV series I just finished watching called The Resident. I have watched every episode that exists of this on Netflix. So it was an interesting time. For those who don't know very much about me, I love medical dramas. And I watched all of this since July. So I started it in July and I just finished it last weekend. So I'm very excited to tell you kind of my overall thoughts on the series and whether I think you will enjoy it if you've not seen it before. So let's start with the beginning of the series. We have a guy named, and I've got my list of characters here on my phone so that I tell you right because there's a lot of characters. We've got Devin Pravesh. And in our first episode, he is new to the hospital. He's a resident and he is going to be studying primarily under Conrad Hawkins. Conrad is a bit of a loose cannon. He is kind of coded like House as being like really, really smart and able to find things that nobody else can, but he's a loose cannon. He doesn't play by the rules. He is, you know, he will do whatever it takes to make you better, but it may be unconventional. He's also former Army. And so Devin is put with him to kind of learn about the hospital and how it works and how to be an amazing doctor. Now, I will tell you, you're kind of given the impression in the very beginning that this show is going to focus on Devin, but honestly, it doesn't. Conrad is, I would say, the main character. Everybody else feels to me like a side character in Conrad's story. Although when we get to the last episode, they do try to bring it back to Devin's story and be like, "Hey, we're still Devin, the resident. Remember him? Yeah. This is still his story." There's a lot of talk in the last episode about yes, remember when you were a resident. So we have this hospital that everybody is working at, and I believe it undergoes a couple different names throughout because it does change hands. Um, and it is the whole series is largely about this hospital trying to survive. And it's trying to survive a lot of corruption, it's trying to survive in a medical world, it's trying to just survive. And I will say, even though there are 6 seasons, there this series feels like it takes place over a lot longer of a time. You have several large time jumps that make it feel like from the first episode to the last, probably 10, 15 years have passed, as opposed to the 6 one would expect for, a 6 season show. I think overall I really enjoyed it. I would give it like a solid 4 stars. I really liked it, obviously enough to watch every episode. I do have some complaints that I would like to point out though. The first is just simply that, and I think this is an unfortunate thing with television, you can really have a lot of problems when you have cast that do things that are unexpected. So there are 2 really important characters that leave in the middle of the show. And I think that both leaving really hurt the rest of the show. The one that left, I don't remember why the actress decided to leave. And they tried to give her like a good out that made sense, and I appreciated that. But at the same time, it felt like then what they did afterwards with the characters that she was connected to, it didn't feel as intense as what they had been doing with her. And I think that's another thing that can happen with medical dramas is I hate when relationships end and then start up again with new characters when they don't feel as good as the first relationship. Like you're really invested in that first relationship and then they break up for reasons and then the person kind of gets with somebody else and you're like, maybe don't really care. So I think this show definitely suffers from that. There is also a character who dies in the show, and again, it was a actress who decided that they couldn't continue, and this actually caused a huge time jump too. And I really wish there had been some way around this because they were a fairly important main character, And I think the show really suffered after their character death. As a matter of fact, I almost didn't want to continue watching. And it was made even worse by the fact that just like a season before, they'd been put in terrible peril and almost died. And so they almost die and then they do die. And it's like, wait a second. Wait a second. And again, like if the actual actress had died, they wouldn't have had a choice. But I felt like there was something they could have done differently than killing this character because it kind of screwed everything up. And then you have this giant time jump and it created just characters kind of acting outside of what you would expect them to, or like there is a character relationship that happens that I don't know that was believable, but that felt like it happened because of this other character death, if you know what I mean. And I was just like, I don't really like that. I'm not sure that I think those characters should have ended up together, despite why you tried to do that. I did feel like the ending of the show was quite rushed. Another thing I want to point out is there are a lot of redemption arcs in the show, and sometimes I felt like too many. We have one character who I felt like their redemption arc was great. And I will name that character because I don't think this is a huge spoiler. It is Dr. Bell. So, Dr. Bell, when we first meet him, is a dangerous surgeon. He used to be like brilliant and highly respected, but in recent years, he's had some problems. And both personally and professionally, and he and Conrad do not get along. They absolutely hate each other at the beginning. And this guy, Dr. Bell, is not a good guy. Now, he does get his redemption arc through the show, and I thought that was very well done. However, there is another person who they're going for a redemption arc, but because of the way, and they're going for a very similar story as Bell's, but unfortunately, I think aside from or beside Belle's story, it's not as effective and it feels very rushed. It's something that happens in the last season and a character who's introduced kind of late in the show, so I don't want to say who it is. But they just were very. I didn't believe their redemption arc the way I did believe Belle's. Belle's, I was invested in. We got to see it. It took seasons, and we saw him really changing. And this other person, it's like, this is a crap person. This is a crap person. This is a crap person. Oh, wait, redemption. And I didn't love that. We have a lot of characters who do grow and change, but it did feel sometimes like there wasn't a lot of planning with it, or like again maybe sometimes people left before it was intentional. So I felt like the series as a whole, it did some really fun things, and there were some episodes I loved, but I wish that if there had been a plan, they'd have been able to stick with it without actors quitting because I think that would have been stronger. I thought some of the actors that left the show were people I was very invested in and stories I was very invested in. And many of the people who came to replace them, especially in the later seasons, didn't work quite as well for me. I also felt like there were some characters that didn't get the exploration that I would have liked. One of those is Jessica. She is a scrub tech and she is a very minor character, but she has like this romance. And I would have loved to see more of her romance because I think that was so important. The challenges that her and her partner face, she's a bigger girl. And I know early in the book, or early in the movie, I'm sorry, I read a lot of books. Early in the show, in their relationship, they're keeping it on the down low, and she's like afraid that it's because he doesn't want to be seen with her, and that's not the case. And I would have liked just a lot more of their relationship. Their relationship is one that's kind of glossed over, but in some ways it's one of the more interesting relationships because of my investment in their dynamic. Also, the guy she's with is really funny, and they're one of the characters that, or a set of characters that I felt could have been really brought to the forefront, and they never are. They're very, very second character through the whole thing. Whereas by the end, we have several characters that started as like minor secondary characters who now have full character arcs. So I felt like that was a lost opportunity. We did have a few characters that never got redemption. And I will say sometimes the stories were so over the top that I didn't appreciate where they were coming from. We have one character, let me look up his name. Dr. Barrett Kane. Dr. Barrett Kane is one of the bad guys in the series, I would say. And I felt like we needed more development from him as a character to really understand why he was terrible. If I recall, he did not get particularly a redemption arc. And here's the thing, like a character that's terrible, I want to really understand why they're terrible. And I don't think the show is necessarily always good at that. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. And a lot of times they have kind of the same characters with the same issues or the same stories or the same almost stereotypes. You know, the doctor who is killing patients because of arrogance unintentionally. The doctor who will do anything to make money and be wealthy. The doctor who is arrogant but very capable, but, you know, maybe not so likable. You have all of these things that you just kind of see recurring, and I felt like sometimes the stories weren't as fresh as they could be. And then when you did have really good in-depth characters, often they were ones that I felt like either didn't get the story time that they needed or we weren't there. I will say Conrad, like I said, is one of the main characters. He has a really interesting story arc and is much different in the beginning than at the end. I had some mixed feelings sometimes about his methods, but I think you're supposed to. So I think the show does a really good job of asking the question, you know, at what point are you doing harm, even though you're trying to take all these heroic measures to save people? And is that always the right thing to do? Things like that. I think there were some really great discussions about things, including there is a discussion in a late season when a character decides that they want to be child-free and their partner is not sure that they want to be child-free. And I really appreciated that discussion. I don't necessarily know that the ending of that story arc worked in a very reasonable way for me. Like I understood why we made the choices we made, but in a realistic situation, do I feel like that is the best call for most people? I don't know. There was also, they did bring in COVID, which I thought was great. It was, again, a time jump, weird situation to bring in COVID, which I didn't love, but I guess they had to. The show just often felt a little bit choppy. So there were time jumps, there were things happening, there were just big bits of time, and there were things that felt random that happened sometimes, like if I looked it up because the actor was like, hey, I can't be in the show anymore. So while overall I really did enjoy The Resident, I don't necessarily think it was as good as Private Practice or Grey's Anatomy or House. Like I would still rank those above this. I think I've watched every episode of Private Practice. I've not watched every episode of Grey's Anatomy, but I've watched the first like 5 or 6 seasons, every episode. I'm sure it's changed a lot as we've gotten further on. I've watched every episode of House, so I can compare it to House. I do think House is better and more entertaining and more focused. So, but yeah, I did watch The Resident. Overall, I liked it, and I think you might too, if you like medical dramas. So, leave your thoughts on The Resident below. This has been Jane. I'll talk to you next time. Bye! Pictures and patterns put into words that stream across the page.